Welcome to Democracy Here. My name is Doug Selwyn, and today we will have part 2 of our look at high-stakes testing. Last time we had an introduction to the topic and began to explore the impact that high-stakes testing has had on students and on our educators. Today we'll go deeper into the impact that high-stakes testing and No Child Left Behind has had on public education system. This program is part of the ongoing work of the Education Task Force of Franklin County, continuing the political revolution.
Good news to you I'll tell of how the good old Union has come in here to dwell. Which side are you on, my sisters? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, my sisters? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, my sisters? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, my sisters? Which side are you on? My mother is a feminist and she taught me to see until we all have justice, not one of us is free.
We're again fortunate to have Meg Robbins, Pixie Holbrook, Monty Neill, and Barbara Madeloni in the studio to help us go deeper into the topic of high-stakes testing. High-stakes testing has been with us since 2002 with the passage of No Child Left Behind, legislation that required that virtually all students pass English and math standardized tests. If they failed to pass, there would be an increasing series of penalties to schools and school districts, and that is still the case. So we've had high-stakes testing officially for 16 years. Does it work? What do we know about the impact that it's had over this period of time? So what changes and what evidence do we have that it's been an effective means of bringing us better education? And this is open to any of you.
It's failed. The simple statement is that it's failed, even by its own indicators.
Right.
So in this country, we have something called the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which on April 10, the latest data was out, and I'm recording this on that day. I will say that, and I don't know what the data is yet, except Massachusetts continues to score high. And the protesting people say that's because we have testing. However, Massachusetts has always scored high. So when you dig into this, what you found out is that when the test came in, the scores were going up. But they were going up before the test came in under No Child Left Behind. And then after a couple of years, by 2007, the score gains started to flatten. So even in language, arts, and math, by an independent national test, the gains flattened, and then they essentially have stalled. This was the period when supposedly all the emphasis on testing was going to produce improved learning outcomes. The second thing was it was supposed to close the gaps between African Americans and Latinos on one end and whites and Asians on the other, and that hasn't happened either. The gap remains essentially the same. So we have stagnating scores, and we have the gaps staying just as wide as they were before. The difference is we've also had huge damage to schools, to teachers, to the curriculum, and ultimately to kids' learning. So we hear stories like from professors. The kids are coming in, and we ask them to investigate, and they ask us what the answer is supposed to be, because they can't think anymore. And this changed because of all the testing. All the testing meant that learning was supposed to be regurgitating facts and numbers and data back, and whereas colleges want you to think. Even most jobs want you to think on the job, but you're not learning how to do that. And never mind being a citizen and addressing the serious social and ecological and economic crises that are endemic to our country and our planet, and we're asking people to learn, except learning isn't thinking. And a huge piece of that is due to the standardized testing, which is, I think, the absolute worst part of it all. We are producing a generation, we're not asking them to learn to be social with each other, to work collaboratively with each other, that's cheating on the tests, or to learn how to solve deep problems collaboratively.
So I remember when I was studying to be a teacher, one of the things that we used to talk about was the implicit curriculum and the idea of like how you teach and what you teach is sending a message to young people about what's important, about what matters, and about what thinking looks like, what learning looks like. And so it's very different implicit curriculum between being able to bring young people together in a space where they're investigating questions, they're challenging each other with information, they're being creative about how they're building knowledge, and valuing that. I'm saying that's what it means to learn is to study the world and investigate the world in a community of people. That's one kind of implicit curriculum. Very different from the implicit curriculum that says this is about a test that everybody's taking that there's one answer to. And your job is to find that one answer. Like, I don't want standardized testing that is ostensibly critical thinking, because there'll still be one answer if it's standardized, rather than the possibility that we're investigating in the world and that we might discover things that we hadn't thought of. As an English teacher, my students would read poetry, and suddenly I'd be reading a different poem than I had been reading, had ever read before, because the student entered that poem in a way that I had not entered the poem and not been capable of entering the poem. So the silencing, the conformity, the insistence that there's one way and we're going to compare you to each other in terms of one way to think and learn is deeply troubling about the implicit curriculum. And teachers feel that every day. And they don't want to be the ones who are teaching children that there's only one way to think and enter the world. We're here to do work that discovers the possibilities in young people, not silences them.
And what have you seen in your classrooms?
I wanted to say, through the filter of a teacher of children with special needs, I often think about the world of work after school. And how am I preparing my students for that experience? And so, again, I guess that's the implicit understanding is, what does the world of work want from their young people? Do they want, as Alfie Kohn used to call it, the bunch of facts? That's what the MCAS was, a bunch of facts. That's not what the world of work wants. They want critical thinking. They want problem solving. They want wonderful social skills so you get along with your colleagues. Nobody's acknowledging the need for that. And I always felt a great deal of responsibility to bring that out in my students, or to help them see that that's one of your strengths rather than it's all about what you can't do. So it is that implicit curriculum in preparing them for the world of work, and it's not a bunch of facts in the world of work.
Well, and the world of work changes so rapidly that we're really sort of walking backwards into the past, right? I mean, we're preparing people to teach in a world that won't exist in 5 or 10 years in terms of what's expected at a workplace, or what it is that they're going to want people to do in a job, except to be able to adapt and be flexible and to work with others and to problem solve and to think critically.
So as a social studies teacher, one of the things I do remember in the early days is one of the big pushes was by the Business Roundtable about that our job as teachers was to create workers. The curriculum was supposed to be about creating the workers that could enter into whatever that work was and be good workers. And I remember just thinking, wait a minute, I thought my job as a teacher was to produce educated citizens for the United States of America. And there was the two conversations were really pretty divergent. I think that we probably were, and probably still are, producing a certain kind of worker, because they are a worker that will say, you know, yes, sir, and I'll keep my job and we'll move on. But they're not people who are going to be able to tell what truth is.
I so appreciate your saying that, Meg. Like that, really, the language of what is the purpose of public education has been so distorted, not just by saying it's about test scores, but that it's about workplace, preparation for the workforce. And if we look at the workforce right now, it fits with the high stakes testing. It's, more and more the workforce is precarious and uncertain. Is workplace intensification. You have to do what you're told, show up when you need to show up, not ask questions. I mean, Amazon follows people on Fitbit to know where they are at a work site. So I actually think that this is preparing one segment of our society for a certain kind of workplace experience. And meanwhile, another segment of our society is going to be able to access a broader, richer, deeper liberal arts curriculum, both in high school and then when they go to college.
Yeah, there's been, I think, a big lie. That's the only way I can call it. This pretense that all the jobs are going to require critical thinking and creativity. So we need our kids to do that. And then we're going to have a standardized test to tell us if we're getting there. So the whole thing is crazy, but on two key levels. Key level one, of course, the standardized test is going to tell us nothing of the kind. But the lie comes in that, in fact, as Barbara was getting at, that's not where the jobs are. Every year, the Bureau of Labor Statistics projects the next 10 years. And I've been looking at these now for more than 30 years, and they haven't changed that much. Most of the actual jobs people will get won't pay that much. And it's not like they require no thought. I mean, the idea that they sometimes act like waiters and waitresses don't need to think. Not true. Lots of jobs require thinking, but they don't necessarily require a lot of academic skills. And so really what's going on here is a kind of watered down academic thing. No effort to help people learn to think interactively as citizens in the world. No desire to unleash their creativity, because in fact, big business knows that most of the people they're actually going to want to hire, like Amazon, they don't want people who will cause them trouble. They want people who will go along, who will be quiet, who will be desperate because of precariousness, who will want to keep that job, but who have also never been prepared through our schools to demand more than that, to talk back, as you mentioned earlier, Barbara. And so we really need, I think, to say, what's the society we want to have? Is it a society where we don't want most of the people to think, where we don't want most of the people to actually be engaged? Or do we want a society that really is about democracy here, that's participatory democracy? And that's critical. And yes, I'm a parent and a grandparent. Kids got to make a way in the world, and you need to get jobs or do something economically to do it, and that's a part of the story. But the idea it should control the story is, I think, very, very dangerous.
So let me ask you, how has this changed schools? Right? You know that life in the classroom is different. You've both talked about that. The feeling of schools and what it's like to be in a school, has that been changed by high-stake testing being
From a
part
teacher's perspective or a student's perspective, or both?
However you can answer that.
I think it was telling to me when my granddaughter entered 3rd grade, first day of school, and she came home and she drew a poster that she put on her bedroom door. And the poster said, "Quiet, MCAS testing in progress." She has come back from summer vacation, eager to get back to school, and that's what she saw. That's who she was. I'm now an MCAS test taker. That was very appalling to me, very appalling. I know the teacher, she has not made a big influence on that. It's a very fine, small country school, but that's the takeaway for a young person. That was very disturbing. So I think all the rules have changed.
And how are teachers talking with each other about these issues?
So that's the other perspective I think that's being lost. If part of I think the grand thing was, if we do this long enough, if testing is something that you just stick to over a certain period of time, people will forget about what it looked like before we had testing. And so teachers who've been in the system, most of the teachers my age are not there anymore. So they're gone, and the teachers who are there are people who've always taught with MCAS. They've always had that assessment be part of how they've learned and how they've walked through. Sorry. They don't really know what it was like before, and they don't have that feeling for it. But I know that working in schools now as a consultant, teachers take it as an honor to be named to a data team, for example. And a data team's job is for really engaged, good teachers to sit down together and look at their MCAS data and just figure out where the kids answered the questions right, where they answered it wrong, and what do they have to reteach or rethink about what they're teaching. And often that could be about something that actually does need to have thought about. It does need to be retaught, or teachers do need support about how they're going to go about it. But too often it's the exact same way a question is structured on a math test, and it comes up every single year. We're not teaching the kids well enough how to answer that kind of question, as opposed to what is the learning and the outcome that needs to go there. And right now, MCAS is happening across the state. There's no learning happening during the month of April, going into May, and when the tests are over, it's whoopee time. You know, finally, we can teach what we want to teach because it doesn't count anymore. But we're not going to see the scores for the kids who took those tests. As we hand our kids on to the next grade level, someone else has those kids, and the scores are irrelevant for us to be able to apply to what have I learned about what my student knows, and what do I need to do differently in my teaching.
That reminds me, one of the critical things that's going on that's a product of No Child Left Behind and MCAS is that schools and districts now feel compelled to add more tests during the school year. So I don't know locally here, but around Massachusetts and the country, what we see, they're called interim or benchmark or periodic tests.
Progress monitoring.
Progress monitors, et cetera. And they're given anything from 3 times a year to monthly to weekly even, little micro tests. And the whole thing does, one is, the purpose is to keep everything narrowly on track to jacking up MCAS scores at the end, but it's also a method of controlling what teachers do day in and day out in the classroom. And it means there's a huge amount of time spent on those tests, often given on computers, so you get the scores back quick. But the really narrow curriculum, and it's all based on again, the same rigid, a non-critical thing. It's about rote learning in order to spit it back on this test, and everything goes down the track that way. And I would say at least we're beginning to see some real pushback around both the large-scale tests and the local tests, which I hope we can get to in a moment, because I think it's important to know that parents, teachers, and students are fighting back against this.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say before we get sort of more specifically to that, I hear from educators all the time. And interestingly, it's a lot of the younger educators, because people come to this work full of idealism. People don't come to be teachers to say, I want my students to get a good score on a standardized test. And the pain that teachers feel about participating in what they experience as a really punitive, painful experience for young people is profound. And they're really tied up in that, because they're made to be afraid. They're told that if they refuse the test, they'll be insubordinate. They talk to parents about refusing the test, they'll be insubordinate. And yet they know every day that they're enacting a practice that's bad for children. And that is so painful for educators.
So before we get into the resistance, I want to tread quickly, though hopefully usefully, on the question of money. We learned in the 70s to always follow the money, right? Who's making money on the test? How does the economics of testing factor into the reason that it's still around? What impact does that have on the schools? We talked a little earlier off camera about unfunded mandates, so I want to make sure we mention that. What are the costs of doing this? Who's making money? What are the benefits, and to whom? Again, I throw that to any of you.
Well, it basically goes to testing companies.
Right.
Pearson is the biggest. It's a contract in Massachusetts. It's the largest educational testing service that makes the SAT. There's a number of other McGraw-Hill companies that sell these products. They make money. The truth of the matter is, if you only look at the cash dollars, it's a small fraction of what we really spend. It's a wasted fraction, but it's a small fraction. The real cost, when we look at this, is not the actual cash to the private company, it's the destruction of teaching and learning. But I would add one other thing that is happening around the money piece, which is the tests are being given on computers now. You got to have all the hardware, and you got to buy more and more hardware and more software, except it's obsolete in 2 or 3 years. So you have to buy more hardware and more software. And a growing amount of the budget is spent on the computers and the software and the wiring in the schools. Now, some of that's obviously useful, but a lot of it is being driven in very narrow ways for the convenience of administering the standardized tests, so that the funny part then comes when they do that, kids can't use the computers for a month at a shot because they're busy being given on the test. And so you want to use the computer as an actual work tool, you can't do it.
And as well, not just about the testing, but because we've narrowed our sense of what constitutes thinking and learning to something that's individual and very specific and sort of data-driven, they now have introduced what they called personalized learning on computers, where students sit in front of a computer and the computer lets them know how they're doing because we're so narrow about what it is that they actually should be doing and learning. And the idea, as I said earlier, that you actually learn within the context of a community of young people and experts coming together to think and explore the world is gone. And that, to me, is actually the most significant danger that's coming. That they're bringing in tests that are, we won't need standardized tests. We're just going to be testing kids every day, and they'll know exactly where they stand based on the algorithm that popped up on their computer.
All right, well, let's turn to, there are obviously concerns at this table about what's happening. What do we do about it? What's being done? What actions are folks taking around the state, around the country? And how, if people are concerned, what are steps they can take? So let's start with what is happening. What kind of resistance is happening within the state or within the schools?
You look like you want to say something, Pixie. Go ahead.
I'm not seeing enough. That's my first response. I'm disturbed. I think it's become normalized, and that's very concerning to me.
It's being normalized, meaning that
That everyone just accepts this is what school is now. Young parents had to take it themselves. Oh, I've been through that before. But I'm also hearing that young parents are saying it was a horrible experience and I want to stop it. So I'm hoping that there's going to be a growing vehicle for this level of change and opposition.
And when Pixie and I were younger, when this first came out, and MCAS first sort of hit the wall in Massachusetts, and Monty was becoming active at FairTest and really giving us a lot of good guidance around that, there was a huge pushback by teachers across the state and across the country. And there were, in this area, in Franklin County and in Hampshire County and through this whole area, we had mass meetings of teachers who came together, wanted to know about the tests, wanted to know what they could do about the tests. It was remarkable. I mean, we just put out like a little invitation and let schools know about it. We were watching hundreds of teachers. That first time we did it at Smith College, remember? Come in and line the walls and, standing room only about what can we do. And they stayed very active around it. I think there was a big pushback already on the state in terms of how they were going to handle that as it came through. But it stayed very, very strong for a good number of years, but not strong enough.
It's interesting because if you look at polling, people have come to understand that standardized testing is not good for young people. Like the numbers are
60%.
Monty would know the exact numbers.
Too much testing.
But that there's too much testing and that it's not good for our schools. So there's this difference between what people know to be true, educators and parents, and actually what we enact every day. And it is frustrating to try to find a place where parents can work with each other and opt out. I think we've had too many isolated instances of people opting their children out, and we need to figure out how to get whole communities together to do that work so that teachers themselves can be supported when they support the opt-out movement as well. I'm encouraged by the teachers in West Virginia, Oklahoma, Kentucky, and Arizona that I think, educators in Massachusetts are angry about the testing. I'm encouraged that being inspired by what's happening across the country, maybe they'll feel freer and have a sense of solidarity and courage to organize to fight back more dramatically. But we have to have the parents with us to do that.
And one of the things that the other Alfie Kohn quote I'm just going to say quickly was, learn or we'll hurt you. And that is pretty much what teachers feel a lot, and communities feel very much, that the punishment will be so severe and so swift that they can't open their mouths.
There's a lot of fear, but the opt-out movement around the country is overwhelmingly led by parents. That's who's doing it. So that in New York State, 3 years running, it's been 20% or more of the parents in grades 3 through 8 are refusing to have their kids tested. High school is different because if you don't pass the test, you don't get a diploma. But in 3 through 8, there's no consequences for the kids. And so even though the state is spreading misinformation, like they are in Massachusetts and every state pretty much, about that you're not supposed to opt out, they're still doing it. And the state is kind of resigned and accepting that it'll be somewhere around 20% again this year. On Long Island in New York, it's 50%. It's largely white and middle class, but if you look at communities close to New York City that are heavily black and Latino, they got the same 50% opt-out rates and even 60% in some places. Opting out is an important strategy because it very directly expresses an opposition. Done enough, it means the data's no good and they can't go use it to attack you. But I think it's a commitment also on the part of people to stand up, which means that they have a bigger stake in the game at that point. Nonetheless, it's not the only way to go. So for example, we at FairTest, just to tout it, we have a report out, and we interviewed and talked with people from 8 districts around the country where unions led the fight, sometimes with a lot of parent support and sometimes less so. But they got rid of most or all of all those interim and benchmark tests we talked about. They just kicked them out the door. They often took 4 and 5 years to do it. They had to elect a new school committee to be able to do it. And the new school committee got a new superintendent in, and then they got rid of all that extra testing. So it can be a long process, but unions are in a good position to do that. And then in other places, we've seen students walk out on the testing, been a major, major force, and particularly in the consequences of testing, like closing schools and stuff. Students have often been really in the lead around some of those issues. So we have to bring them into the picture too. They feel very viscerally, day in and day out, what it means to go to school where you are treated as less than, where you're reduced to a number, and where the teaching and learning is supposed to be something that can be measured with a simplistic instrument.
So when those who are pushing for high-stakes testing still say, you either do this or there's no functional assessment, how would we know how the kids are doing? How do we respond to that?
I call BS on that. That's what educators do all the time. Teaching is assessing. You're in your classroom, you are thinking about your students, you're attentive to your students, and you're modifying in the moment what you're doing, and you're modifying as you reflect about what you're doing in terms of where the students are and what they can do. And it's much richer and more meaningful than anything that you're going to get from standardization. I'm going to go back to what you were saying earlier, Meg. I mean, that's what we were able to do once, and to be respected for our knowledge and expertise as people who can do that. So I think we really have to affirm that we know what to do. And to the degree that there are issues that we need to reflect on as a society relative to economic and racial injustice and how that impacts our schools, that's an important thing for us to do. And that's an important part, a conversation for educators and students in the community to be a part of. But that's what we do as educators.
And I would also say that there are, the big question is, so how will you be held accountable for that? And there are lots of really great, innovative ways to be publicly accountable for what our kids have learned beyond standardized testing. Some schools do performance-based testing, which is just terrific. The kids work on a project and they incorporate what their goals and outcomes are, and they present it to a board of community folks who really can sit there and talk to each other. I work with teachers on collaborative looking at student work, which is essentially the same thing.
So as we wrap up, if people want to know more about how to get involved, are there particular places they might contact? We have very little time.
Yeah, FairTest.org, citizensforpublicschools.org has a testing resistance and reform campaign in Massachusetts.
And the Massachusetts teachers, massteacher.org also has links to opting out and information about the dangers of high-stakes testing.
So thank you to Barbara Madeloni, president of the Massachusetts Teachers Association, Monty Neill from FairTest, and veteran teachers Pixie Holbrook and Meg Robbins for helping us begin a conversation about high-stakes testing and the ways that we can work together to take back the schools for our children and for our democracy. This is Doug Selwyn for Democracy Here and for Franklin County Continuing the Political Revolution.
A little socialism don't scare me one bit. Which side are you on, my sisters? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, my sisters? Which side are you on? Come all you northern liberals, taking Klansmen out to dine. The time has come to choose a side and join the picket line. Which side are you on, my sisters? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, my sisters? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, my sisters? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, my sisters? Which side are you on? My father was a carpenter, now he's with the air and sun. But he'll be with his fellow workers till the battle's won. Which side are you on, my sisters? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, my sisters? Which side are you on? They say in Milwaukee, cleansed by Great Lake water, you'll either be a Union man or a thug for Skywalker. Which side are you on, my sisters? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, my sisters? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, my sisters? Which side are you on? Which side are you on?